one point, this man controlled an empire worth over $100 million. He had politicians in his pocket, thousands of men working for him, and enough power to practically rule an entire city. His name became so famous that Hollywood would later immortalize the nickname that made him feared across America. And yes, I'm talking about none other than Scarface Capone. Born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1899, Alphonse Capone grew up in a poor immigrant family and dropped out of school at just 14. Surrounded by gangs and crime from an early age, Capone quickly found himself heading down the same path. As a teenager, he began working for Brooklyn mobster Frankie Yale, and during his time as a bouncer at one of Yale's bars, a fight left a permanent scar across the left side of his face, the nickname that followed him for the rest of his life, Scarface. Ironically, Capone hated the name and often tried to hide the scar. And no, despite the similarities, Tony Montana from the movie Scarface wasn't actually based on Al Capone, but the nickname would eventually become legendary. By the early 1920s, Capone had caught the attention of one of America's most powerful mobsters, Johnny Torrio. Recognizing his potential, Torrio invited the young Capone to Chicago. Capone accepted, and that decision would change his life forever. Chicago, in the 1920s, was the perfect place for a man like Al Capone. With prohibition banning alcohol across America, illegal liquor suddenly became a billion-dollar business. Working under Johnny Torrio, Capone quickly rose through the ranks, and when Torrio retired, Capone took over. Still in his 20s, he now controlled a criminal empire built on bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. At his peak, Capone was earning an estimated $100 million a year and had politicians and police officers on his payroll. But his reign wasn't without bloodshed. In 1929, 7 members of a rival gang were murdered in what became known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Although Capone denied any involvement, the massacre made him America's most infamous gangster. Yet despite years of violence, intimidation, and countless crimes, authorities struggled to bring him down until 1931. Not for murder, not for bootlegging, but for tax evasion. Capone was sentenced to 11 years in prison and eventually transferred to Alcatraz. Years of untreated syphilis slowly destroyed his health, and after being released, he spent his final years away from the spotlight. In 1947, Al Scarface Capone died at the age of 48, but nearly a century later, his name still lives on as one of the most legendary and feared gangsters in history. And that's the rise and fall of America's most notorious gangster in 200 seconds.